Howdy folks, and welcome back to Healthy Humor. I'm your host, Doc MB, and with me today are my two favorite occasional co-hosts, Babe and Winnie. Clearly a lot of high energy today from the two of them. So, if you're like me, or you're like most Americans, most individuals, I would say, actually, you're probably pretty interested in, how you can live a long and healthy life, right? We want to live as long as possible, but we want to do it as healthily as possible. Because what's the point of getting to live to be 90 or 100 years old if you're completely dependent on somebody else the entire time, right? So, you may or may not have already heard about blue zones, but today we're going to talk about blue zones and some of the commonalities between blue zones. So, a blue zone, which again you might already know, especially if you've watched some of the really good documentaries out there, a blue zone is an area, a population, in a specific area that has a higher than average density of centenarians. So they have a lot of people in that area that are centenarians. What is a centenarian? A centenarian is someone who is living to be at least 100 years old. And in these communities that they studied, these aren't, oh, this is the one random person who lived to be 100 because they had all kinds of surgeries and what have you, or were on the highest end medications. These are people who, through lifestyle, is the main reason that they live to be that old. And it shows in their choices, or their choices show in their health outcome, I should say. So, most of our information today is actually coming from the report that was put together after the show Live to 100 Secrets of the Blue Zones, which was a documentary put out on Netflix. This is the actual report that was done that was for that. Or that kind of the research that was put together for that. This is where this information is coming from. So there are 5 blue zones identified. That was Okinawa, Japan, Ikaria, Greece. I will mispronounce several things in this episode. Get excited. Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, and then Loma Linda, California. So they found 9 commonalities between these different blue zones, and they actually referred to those 9 commonalities as the 9 powers. So we're going to talk about the 9 powers and maybe some ways that you could influence that in your own life, or adopt some of these powers into your own life. So our first power, or commonality, but our first power is moving naturally. So if you're like a lot of people, you think of health and you don't necessarily think of someone who moves naturally, right? You think about that nephew that's super into powerlifting, or you think about that aunt or cousin or person you work with who runs Ironmans or ultra marathons and other things like that, right? And that's not what they found amongst as a commonality for these individuals, right? It wasn't I hyper perform athletically. Those things, it's they have an emphasis on natural movement, on walkable communities, on being able to stand up and sit down from a chair without having to lean on it or grab a rail or do things like that, on that natural independent movement. That was the focus, right? And then that was where people were putting more of their energy. So not into heavy lifting or very long distance, rigorous running, but on just being a healthy individual. So maybe more yoga and meditation, or healthy, there are a lot of fitness classes out there right now that are aimed at healthy movement. And you don't have to be 80 to go take a healthy movement class, right? I did one, actually just one morning last week. I did a healthy movement class and I loved it. And if you haven't done one in a while, they're actually no joke. So putting more of that, taking time to focus on movement and not just the competitive nature of movement that we oftentimes like to associate with it. The second power is purpose. Finding your purpose in life, right? In Okinawa, they have a saying. It's ikigai. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. And then in the Nicoyan culture, they have playa de vida, and both of those essentially translate into, why do you wake up in the morning? Like, what, why? What's your purpose in life? For me, obviously, I have these guys that they get me out of bed every day. I have a lovely husband. I've got family. I've got students that I work with. I love educating them on health or on just being young college students. I volunteer a lot of my time. I have a lot of purpose that is in my life, and some of that purpose is purpose that I've given to it, and some of it was kind of built in, right? Like, obviously family was built in, but some of these other things are more of a choice, and that's where I found my purpose. So you can too. Our third power is the downshift, which is one that I struggle with at times for sure, but it's essentially the idea that, stress happens. We know stress to an extent is good for us. There are plenty of other studies that show that, right? We need a level of stress in our lives to keep us going and to motivate us. But letting things, especially things that shouldn't hold that much stress or that much power over us, really negatively influence us is bad. So this ninth power is the downshift. And what they found is that in these blue zones, they had ways to downshift stress, to manage that stress. So in some of them, it was yoga and meditation, or prayer, or an afternoon nap, a siesta, if you will. And then in others, it was more, let's go to a happy hour and talk it out, right? Pour one out and talk about it with your friends, or maybe your siblings, whoever it is that you go to your happy hour with. But having these ways in your life, especially your daily life, where you can take these big bundles of stress in your life and kind of break them up into pieces and let them not have so much power over you, that downshifting of that stress. And then the fourth power is the 80% rule, which is also, it got its origins in Okinawa, in Japanese culture, and it's the Harahachi Bu, which some people have probably heard of this before, but the concept is, you only eat until you're 80% full. That's what it essentially means, is you eat until you're 80% full, and that 20% is that, okay, maybe there's a lag between your stomach and your brain, so it does end up being a little bit more like 90 or 100 or something like that, but instead it's doing that instead of getting to 110 or 120, and we feel sluggish and weighed down and like I don't want to do anything. And it also obviously keeps you from consuming too many excess calories, which it's very easy to do depending on where you live, depending on what your culture is, but also just as humans, it's very easy to overconsume, right? So having that 80% rule kind of keeps you within a healthier caloric intake, for sure, but also, will prevent you from that sluggish feeling. So maybe you do want to go on a post-dinner walk, or still just be active later in the day, rather than, oh, I ate too much and now I'm going to lay down on the couch, right? They also found that the fifth power was the plant slant, as they call it, which is essentially the fact that these blue zones all have more plant-based proteins in their diet, right? They don't have this over-reliance on animal products for protein. Instead of having, an 8-ounce sirloin every night at dinner, they're only having animal protein, usually in the form of pork, 5 times a month. And it's 3 to 4 ounces at a time. It's not, our baseline is 6 or 8 ounces. It's 3 to 4 ounces. It's about half what we get a lot of times, especially here in the U.S. And then that frequency is much lower. Outside of that limited amount of pork protein, it's mostly getting protein from things like legumes. That was a big or beans and legumes. It was a big commonality that they found. Which those beans and legumes also have more fiber in them. So that helps everything, right? If you listen to that episode, you know. Uh, but then the sixth power is wine at 5. So our blue zone individuals, while they might be living for a long time, they still have a good time. Not to say that those are ever, exclusive from one another, but the centenarians are definitely, they're staying social, they're going and they are having 1 to 2 glasses of wine pretty much every day, usually with dinner or in the evening around dinner time. They're having 1 to 2 glasses. It's a moderate amount. It's regular. It's not overly frequent, and it's definitely not to an excess, right? And they're averaging that 1 to 2 glasses every evening with dinner. And no, you can't save those all up so that you can go have 15 glasses of wine whenever you meet with your book club, just because you didn't drink the rest of the week, right? It's that average, and I think it's also that sense. In my mind, it would be that you're creating that sense of relaxation on a daily basis in the evening, or that again you're getting to connect with your loved ones or whoever it is that you're sharing that meal with, in a slightly more relaxed setting. Not to say that you can't do it without alcohol, because certainly there are a lot of individuals who have lived to be 100 or so years old who do not drink, and not just don't drink, but are very much like they don't drink, right? It's not that they're just not having that 1 to 2 glasses, they don't drink at all. In Loma Linda, the majority of the centenarians in that community are actually Adventists, and they don't drink at all, but they're still making it to this 100. So don't think that you need to start having 1 to 2 glasses every night if that's not something you normally do. But our drinkers versus our non-drinkers did have a longer life expectancy. The seventh power was belonging, or a sense of belonging. Out of the 263 centenarians that they studied for this research, they found that only 5 of them did not belong to some faith-based organization or another. They also found that the ones that did belong to a faith-based organization, there was no commonality between denominations, as far as, one denomination had a greater life expectancy than another. It was nothing like that. It just was, if you had that sense of belonging, and then specifically in this case within a faith-based organization or group, it was a commonality amongst the centenarians, but it was also something that added to longevity for sure. They found that these individuals were on average going about 4 times a month to interact with whatever their faith-based group was, and that it actually added anywhere from 4 to 14 years onto their life expectancy. It's pretty substantial, if you ask me. All right, so our 8th power is loved ones. So for me, obviously, I have at least these 2 loved ones in my life, but I have a lot of others, and specifically to this research, they were looking at, your loved ones in relation mostly to family. They looked at the fact that within these populations, it's a lot more common to have either to still live with your parents even into adulthood, those multi-generational homes like that, or to have elderly relatives, especially parents, move back in or move in with their children, their offspring, rather than moving into some sort of facility to be around strangers, or especially to have that exposure to diseases and other things that are common in those sorts of communities, but instead rather to live at home and then to be around that family, and especially the interactions with the youngest of whatever the generation is. It really seemed to give a lot of that that sense of belonging that we all look for. So again, maybe your belonging isn't in your faith group, but that is where they mostly talked about it. Maybe your sense of belonging is with your loved ones, right? Our 9th and final power is finding the right tribe. So your tribe might be that group of friends you made in high school and you guys all held on to each other fiercely and never let go. Your tribe might be the team that you work on at work. It might be a group that you're involved with at your church or local community center. It could be everyone of the same generation as you and your family, or your tribe could be some, amalgamation of all of those things, right? But finding your tribe and that sense of belonging is super important. It also is where you get a lot of your habits from, right? The people that are in your life, they have influence over you and you over them. And if your tribe is a very healthy tribe and they're making healthy choices, well, you're going to be making those healthy choices too, right? But if everyone in your tribe smokes cigarettes and excessively drinks and never exercises, then most likely that will end up being, traits that you take on as well. Even if you don't think of yourself that way, it happens slowly over time. But obviously, as we know, those types of activities decrease your life expectancy, and we're trying to live longer, happier, healthier lives here. So, taking a look at who your tribe is, and your tribe might change over your life or it might stay the same, but making sure that it's a healthy tribe that is in sync with you is very important. So, and where you live really matters too. This isn't one of the powers anymore. This is something else that they discuss in their research, but this life radius that you have, where the average person spends the majority of their life within 5 miles of their home, of where they live. And that's not, not saying that you can't spend more of your time somewhere else or whatever, but life gets busy, right? You only have time to go on so many errands in a day, and those errands might need to be closer to your home, or you don't want to have to drive 10, 15, 20 miles to go to the gym. So if there's a good facility in that 5 mile radius, that's the one you're going to be going to, things like that. Thinking about, what's the air quality in the area that you live? What's the walkability of the area that you live? Are there any danger factors in the area that you live? Because like I said, and like they found, the overwhelming majority of us are spending our lives within that 5 mile radius of where we live. So that it definitely has a huge influence on our lives, but there were no commonalities between those amongst these blue zones. It was just, they found that people tend to live within that radius. So thinking about your radius, or thinking about the ways that you might be able to influence your health and add any of these activities to your health, or these mantras, right, into your life. Like maybe it's the 80% rule, maybe it's the figuring out what your purpose is, maybe you need to figure out where your tribe really lives, and who they are, right? So the other thing that I want to point out with all of these, and what I usually point out with my students, is, we have these 9 powers, but if you really look at all of them, a lot of them have to do with social cohesion. You find your tribe, you have your loved ones, that sense of belonging, your community, things like that. Like it's about that social cohesion, that staying connected to one another. And as humans, we are very social creatures, so it would make sense that having a strong social glue holding us together and holding us here alive would make sense. So figuring out what yours is and how you can foster that in your life is going to be huge for your health outcomes. If you're thinking, well, it doesn't really matter what I do, I have this genetic predisposition for cancer or for dementia or Alzheimer's or whatever the issue might be, you might think again. And you might also listen to our next mini-sode that's going to air in 2 weeks from now, where I'm going to be taking a look at the relationship between our genetics, that kind of framework that gets passed down from generation to generation, and the choices that we make in our life. We're going to try to figure out how easily you might be able to out-health your genetics and outlive your genetics. So if you're interested in that, if you liked this video, please, go hit the like button. But certainly go ahead and follow along if you're interested in our next mini-sode, which will be in 2 weeks, looking at the differences between our genetics and our choices and how we can overcome whatever our genetic predisposition is. So again, please like, follow, subscribe, comment if you are enjoying the material, or comment and just say hi to Babe and Winnie. They'd appreciate it too, you know? All right. Well, I hope you have a happy and healthy day.